Good morning, everyone. Can you all hear me okay? Amazing. I'll just take a few more minutes of your time. I'm from the Research Analysis Division. I lead the team, and we are so incredibly proud to announce one of the massive projects that we have worked on since the end of last year. In case you don't know anything about us, we are specialized in independent policy research and data analysis here at POLITICO. And we launched 3 years ago, and with our birthday coming up now, I'm very happy to show you what we have done. Okay. Well, first of all, we have created this index to answer one of the most defining questions of Europe's digital decade. Why hasn't its very ambitious digital regulatory framework delivered the achievements that it had set out to complete? And in order to do that, we are measuring the gap between ambition and member states' capacity. And we want to assess whether all 27 members have the institutions, skills, infrastructure, and governance systems needed to turn law into outcomes. So let's look at what we found. The first pillar of the index looks at exactly that. Voila. It looks at Europe's legislative activity. Specifically here, we are looking at how much digital legislation has been adopted, how quickly, and how that process has been managed. As you can see in the chart that summarizes the results, between 2015 and 2025, the index score rises from 14 to 66.3. That's nearly a fourfold increase in just 10 years. And in fact, in 2024 alone, more than half of all of EU legislation was digital related. So what we see here is that Europe has built a very powerful legislative engine. But the real test is whether this is creating more pressure than member states can actually absorb. So to measure that, we have the second and the third pillar of the index, where each is accounting for half of a country's score in the ranking, and it's built on a series of indicators. The first pillar being member state capacity, and we are looking here at whether member state governments can implement EU digital laws in practice. And the second pillar is ecosystem performance. And we are looking here at whether this is translating into real change, meaning if we are measuring whether that means in infrastructure, skills, businesses, and public services. What do our results reveal? Now, in this map here, which is summarizing the main country rankings, we can see that there is a very clear divide across Europe. Specifically, we have an EU average of 61.3. But the real difference and the real striking result is the fact that there is a gap of almost 25 points between the top and bottom performers. And top performers, as you can see on the map, we have Denmark, Sweden, Finland, Estonia, and Malta. And on the other side of the ranking, we have countries such as Bulgaria, Romania, and Hungary. That doesn't seem so striking. However, this is not a marginal difference, because this really shows that there is real structural difference across all of the member states. And that matters because for the digital single market to actually be able to work, it has to rely on the consistent implementation of all of its members. So, what is driving this difference? First of all, our index looks at the first insight, which is that countries that are strong on governance are weaker in delivery. Germany here is a clear example in the top 5 of this visual. The governance score is one of the strongest in Europe, yet its ecosystem performance is significantly lower. And Slovenia, which is here at the top of the chart, shows an even wider gap compared to others. So the takeaway here is quite simple. Strong institutions do not automatically lead to digital transformation. The second finding, instead, is that smaller states often outperform on agility. So we have seen actually that Estonia has the highest capacity score in the EU, and Malta ranks 4th despite its small size. And these patterns, we actually see them emerging across other countries in the index as well, for instance in Lithuania and Slovenia. All of this is suggesting that smaller countries often benefit from faster coordination, simpler institutional structures, and clearer accountability. The third insight is that wealth matters, but it's not destiny, meaning that we see that there is a clear link in GDP per capita and digital performance, but there are important exceptions to this trend. Specifically, Luxembourg, which we can see here at the top of the chart, has one of the highest GDP per capita, yet it ranks 7th. And similarly, Estonia ranks 5th, however, its GDP per capita is significantly lower, just at around 28,000. And we can see how smaller countries often are outranking wealthier economies. And these cases show that while income does create the conditions for investment, it doesn't guarantee outcomes. What matters equally as much is how these resources are being used through institutional design, policy choices, and long-term investment. And finally, we see that also governments have moved much faster in digitalization rather than businesses. And we can see this in this chart that summarizes these results. And if we isolate only by looking at AI, the adoption is even lower, which ranks at around 14.3% in total. So Europe, again, is leading on regulation, but not so much on the upscaling of these technologies. And if we isolate for SMEs and zoom in closer, which make up the backbone of the economy, this looks even a little bit more worse, because their adoption of AI and data analytics remains extremely low, primarily due to various factors such as high switching costs, underfunded support systems, and most importantly, a lack of digital skills. And actually, this last point on skills is a pattern that emerges across the index overall, because we see countries with stronger performance, with stronger skills perform better across the board, and where skills are instead weaker, infrastructure and regulation alone do not compensate for this lack. Now, zooming out, what are the overall landscape trends that the index reveals? We have found that there are primarily 4 models of country segmentation, 4 models of digital Europe. The first one is that we have balanced leaders. These are countries that combine strong governance with very strong outcomes. That includes those such as Denmark and Sweden, which we have summarized here on the first spider chart. And then we have governance strong but ecosystem weaker countries. And you can see this in the second chart. And here, in this specific case, institutions are in place, but the delivery to businesses and citizens still lags. Third, we have ecosystem-driven but governance-lagging countries, where markets or public digital services are relatively strong, but the implementation systems are less consistent. And finally, we have structural lag countries, which affects both the governance capacity and ecosystem performance of countries. And here we include, of course, as mentioned in the beginning, countries such as Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, and Poland. But also what is not seen in the spider chart is that it includes Greece, Italy, Portugal, Latvia, Czechia, and Cyprus. So overall, the index reveals various trends. It's not just about, the divide is not simply about north and south or large versus small. Capacity issues cut across all of Europe. And countries, every single country faces very different bottlenecks, which is why a one-size-fits-all approach simply won't work in Europe. So, what should Europe do differently? Again, our data points to 4 main findings in this case. Europe primarily should be focusing less on adding new rules and focusing more on implementation. And this is already because admin systems across Europe are already thinly stretched. And second, support needs to be more tailored to what and where the bottlenecks are, whether that's on governance, on delivery, or on building basic capacity. Third, we need to close the adoption gap, because it's not just about implementation. Sometimes these systems are widely distributed, but not widely used. So the focus instead needs to be on usage, having SMEs adopt AI, cloud as well, and also, and more importantly, as mentioned earlier, the skills in order to make that happen. And fourth, we need to improve how we measure progress, especially in areas like AI, sovereign cloud, and data flows, because you can't manage what you can't measure. But to not end on a bleak note, the encouraging news is that we have already seen that there are success stories in Europe, countries such as Denmark, Sweden, Finland, and Estonia, which are at the top of the ranking system. But that progress comes from sustained investment over time, whether it's in governance, in skills, and in execution. And this success can be replicated elsewhere too. It just can't be legislated into existence. It has to be built. Now, before I invite you all to please scan this QR code and check out our complete findings, let me just end on one final data point that we have found. Europe has shown that it can legislate at speed and scale, but it has yet to show that it can do the same with implementation. And this is the gap that our index measures. And what we have found is that an overall arching conclusion to this is that while strengthening implementation capacity is now very, very important, what is equally important is also that of expanding the regulatory framework. But this is not a political statement, it's a finding. Thank you very much. Please join us for our networking lunch in the other room, and please also scan this QR code here to find our complete research report. And lunch will end in about an hour, I think 10 minutes to 2, and thank you very much for your attention.